My name is Autumn. I'm 36 years old. I live in Seattle and work as a data engineer for a major healthcare company. I'm not married. I don't have kids. But I once spent nearly $85,000 on a wedding that wasn't mine. I paid for the venue, the artisanal catering, the string quartet, the dress flown in from a small Milanese studio. And yet, 5 days before the wedding, I received an automated email. My name had been removed from the guest list. No explanation. No phone call. Just deleted. If it were you, what would you do? Stay quiet, consumed by the sting of it? Explode in a fury of justified rage? Or would you quietly, methodically, pull the plug on the whole affair before the first guest even arrived? Leave a comment if you've ever been the one they could always count on, right up until the moment they decided they no longer needed you. Hit like if you believe that sometimes the most powerful response is a quiet, deliberate action. And don't forget to follow as I share what happened next. Every decision, every fracture in the foundation, and the quiet truth that no one, least of all them, ever saw coming. I grew up in a modest clapboard house in Eugene, Oregon, on a street lined with aging oak trees whose leaves carpeted the sidewalks every fall. Our home smelled of my father's wood shavings and my mother's lavender-scented laundry soap. There were 4 of us. My dad, David, a master carpenter who could turn a block of wood into something that felt alive. My mom, Sarah, a librarian at the local community college who spoke in hushed, gentle tones. And my younger sister, Willow, who, from the moment she was born, was treated as if she were spun from glass. I wasn't. My name, my father once told me, came from the quiet, golden light of the afternoon I was born. You were a peaceful baby, Autumn, he'd said, his voice warm like worn leather. Never made a fuss. And perhaps that's where it began, the role of the easy one, a label that settled into my bones and defined my existence. I learned to pour my own cereal, braid my own hair, and walk the 7 blocks to school long before other kids did. Willow's childhood, by contrast, was a carefully curated experience, a world buffered from sharp corners and harsh realities. If she stumbled on the sidewalk, my mother would drop my hand mid-sentence to rush to her side, cooing and checking for invisible scrapes. She's just more sensitive than you are, sweetie. You understand, don't you? Mom would say, her words a soft apology that never quite landed, leaving me to stand alone, holding the weight of whatever we were carrying. I remember asking once why I had to do my chores every Saturday morning while Willow was allowed to paint in her room. My mother was dusting the bookshelves, her movements slow and deliberate. She paused, her gaze soft with a familiar, weary patience. Because you're stronger, Autumn. You can handle it. Your sister, well, you know she's not built the same way. She turned back to her dusting, the conversation closed. The answer was a fact, as solid and unchangeable as the oak trees outside. And I could handle it. I always did. I was the first in our family to navigate the labyrinth of college applications alone. I can still feel the quiet hum of the refrigerator on the night of my senior prom. While my classmates were dancing under crepe paper streamers, I was at the dining room table, meticulously filling out the FAFSA, cross-referencing my parents' tax forms. They were at an urgent care clinic with Willow, who had a tension headache and was convinced it was something more serious. I didn't resent them for it. But I remember the feeling of the pen pressing into my fingers, the profound silence of the house, and the quiet, certain knowledge that I was the only one who would ever truly navigate my own life. I earned a full scholarship to the University of Washington for computer science, a moment that should have been a firework of celebration. When I called home, my mother's voice was warm, but guarded. Oh, that's wonderful, honey. Just, maybe don't bring it up around Willow for a few days. She's feeling so overwhelmed by her art portfolio review. We don't want to add any more pressure. So I folded my joy into a small, neat square and tucked it away. At 17, I was already an expert at making my happiness smaller so it wouldn't cast a shadow on anyone else. Willow attended a small arts college in Portland. When she was accepted, my parents threw a garden party with fairy lights and a custom-made cake. They bought her a top-of-the-line drawing tablet. I remember my dad putting his arm around me during a visit home that summer. Your sister's finding her own way, too, he said, a proud, protective glint in his eye. She's not as fragile as we thought. I smiled and pretended not to hear the word too, the quiet implication that my own accomplishments were the sturdy, expected baseline against which her delicate victories were measured. I was the one who could take it, the one who managed. And perhaps it would have felt like a compliment if it wasn't so often used as a reason not to check if I was okay. I once ran a 102-degree fever for 2 days in my dorm, subsisting on saltines and lukewarm water from the tap. No one from home called. If Willow got the sniffles, my mother would be on the phone researching homeopathic remedies. But I was used to it. Used to walking myself to the campus clinic, buying my own medicine, making instant soup in my microwave. Every time I called to share news of a raise or a promotion, my mother's pride would be quickly followed by a gentle pivot. That's incredible, Autumn. You work so hard. You know, your sister's rent is due next week, and her freelance work has been a little slow, and I would say yes. No one ever asked, are you saving for anything, or are you getting enough rest? Willow had a string of boyfriends, lived in charming, overpriced apartments downtown, her lifestyle subsidized by a combination of my parents' modest savings and my own contributions. When she wanted to take a 6-month sabbatical from life to find her creative voice in Sedona, my mother championed the idea. She needs to heal. As long as you're happy, honey, that's all that matters. Me? I was offered a dream job in London once, a senior position with a biotech startup. When I told my parents, my mother's face fell. Oh, but that's so far away. Willow would be devastated not to have you nearby for support. I turned the offer down. No one ever asked if I regretted it. I'm not writing this to complain. I'm writing to trace the map of my own disappearance, the slow, quiet erosion of a person. They called me the strong one, as if strength were an endless, renewable resource. But I often wondered, if I ever allowed myself to crumble, who would be there to catch the pieces? I still remember that summer with perfect clarity. Seattle was caught in a spell of persistent drizzle, the sky a blanket of soft gray. I was in the final stages of buying my first home, a small condo in Queen, and with a tiny balcony that offered a sliver of a view of Puget Sound. It was nothing grand, but it was mine, a milestone I had quietly, diligently worked toward for a decade, saving every bonus, brown bagging my lunches, and foregoing vacations. Then, a call at 1 a.m. shattered the quiet. It was my mother, her voice a strained whisper laced with panic. Autumn, honey. It's your dad. He had a heart attack. We're at the hospital now. My own heart seized. I was out of bed in an instant, my feet cold on the hardwood floor. Which hospital? I'll book the first flight in the morning. No, don't do that, she said quickly. The doctors say it was mild. He's stable. But he'll be out of work for a few months, and with the medical bills, the prescriptions, you know how it is. I closed my eyes, a familiar ache settling in my chest. I knew exactly what was coming. I'll transfer some money tomorrow, Mom, I said, my voice steady. Just focus on Dad. She didn't say thank you. She let out a long, shuddering sigh of relief, the sound of an expectation met. The sound of the strong one doing what the strong one does. I hung up and walked over to my laptop. The mortgage pre-approval documents were open in a tab. With a heavy heart, I clicked it closed. The dream of that little condo, my quiet sanctuary, began to recede. A week later, I wired them $5,000. Then another $5,000 the next month. I didn't complain. I reworked my budget, paused my 401k contributions, and started eating at my desk again. My father's health was not a negotiation. He was a man of few words, but when I'd gotten my acceptance letter to UW, he'd simply wrapped me in a hug that smelled of sawdust and said, "You earned it, kiddo." The pride in his eyes was a memory I held onto like a precious stone. What I didn't expect was that while I was liquidating stock options to cover his medical expenses, Willow was realigning her chakras in Arizona. I saw it on her Instagram, a photo of her in a plush white robe, holding a green smoothie, overlooking a red rock canyon. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to retreat to heal." #selfcare, #journey Talmas. Healing? I stared at the word. Who exactly was in need of healing? The man recovering from a heart attack, the daughter working 60-hour weeks to keep the family afloat, or the one sipping kale juice at a luxury spa? The next day, my mother called. Her voice was bright, hopeful. Willow is thinking of staying in Sedona for a while. The air is so good for her spirit. She's been so fragile since her breakup with Evan, and all this with your father has been so stressful for her. She paused, then added, there's this adorable little casita for rent, just $2,200 a month. A real bargain. It would be such a wonderful fresh start for her. What are you asking, Mom? I said, though the answer was already hanging in the air between us. Could you help her with the deposit and the first couple months' rent? Just to get her on her feet. She just needs some time to recover emotionally. You know how she is. I could have said no. I could have asked why a 28-year-old woman couldn't get a job to support her own emotional recovery. But I knew the script. To say no would be to be selfish, cold, unfeeling. And so, as always, I chose the path of least resistance for everyone but myself. Okay, Mom. I'll take care of it. After the call, I officially withdrew my offer on the condo. I sent Willow a total of $6,600. There was no direct thank you, just more Instagram posts, artisanal pottery classes, sunrise yoga sessions, photos of books on mindfulness arranged next to expensive scented candles. With every post, a quiet, bitter question grew inside me. Was I helping her heal, or was I simply funding an extended vacation from responsibility? Once, I gently broached the subject. Willow, have you thought about looking for a part-time job? I'm sure there are galleries or cafes in Sedona that would love to have you. There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a short, sharp laugh. A job? Autumn, are you even listening to me? I'm in a healing process. I need this space. Why are you always trying to put your pragmatic, stressful energy onto my life? Before I could respond, my mother's voice joined the call, as if she'd been listening on the other line. Autumn, that's enough. Your sister isn't like you. She feels things so deeply. A little compassion would go a long way. I count on you to be the strong one, but that doesn't mean you get to be cold. I fell silent. Any defense would be twisted into an attack. I hung up the phone. That night, I made a cup of tea and sat by my window, watching the rain streak down the glass. A crack had formed inside me. Not from the money I had given, but from the chilling realization that no one had ever once considered if I had anything left to give. Willow got engaged on a crisp Saturday in October. My mother called while I was at my desk, debugging a complex algorithm for a pediatric monitoring system. Her voice was effervescent, bubbling with a joy I hadn't heard in months. Autumn, you won't believe it. Your sister is engaged. Leo proposed last night at a private vineyard in Napa. I managed to smile into the phone. That's wonderful, Mom. He's just perfect for her, she gushed. He's a wealth manager, went to Wharton. His family has a home in Aspen. He's so sophisticated and he absolutely adores her. My mother had never described any of my previous partners with such breathless admiration. I'll send them a gift, I said, my voice even. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Well, about that. They want to get married next summer. They have their heart set on this stunning coastal resort in Carmel by the Sea. The groom's family will be contributing, of course, but there it was. The inevitable, but. You've always had such a good head for these things, Autumn, she continued, her voice sliding into a familiar, persuasive cadence. And you've done so well for yourself. If you could just help with the initial deposit, and maybe the dress? Willow has her eye on this one designer in Milan. You know how important the aesthetic is for her. I looked at the lines of code on my screen, a world of logic and order. And then I thought of my sister, who lived in a world of aesthetics funded by my logic. How much are we talking about, Mom? Oh, let's not get bogged down in numbers, she said airily. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event. And Willow deserves to feel like a princess. After everything she's been through. I never asked what exactly Willow had been through that warranted a 5-figure wedding financed by her sister. I just said yes. Over the next few months, I became the silent, invisible benefactor of the wedding of the year. I transferred $25,000 for the venue deposit at the Seacliff Manor. I wired $9,500 to a boutique in Milan for a dress made of hand-sewn lace. I paid for the flights to California for the engagement photo shoot. Willow sent me a photo of herself in the dress fitting. It's the one. I feel it. Thank you for making my dream come true. You don't have to get us a wedding gift now. XO. I read that last line over and over, as if she were magnanimously letting me off the hook. Each time I made a payment, I told myself it was the last one. But the calls kept coming. Autumn, Willow is agonizing over the floral arrangements. She trusts your taste. Could you call the florist and help her decide between the peonies and the gardenias? I called. Willow was at a spa, getting a facial. I just don't know, Autumn, she sighed into the phone. What if the peonies look too common? Leo's mother is on the board of the Denver Art Museum. Everything has to be perfect. I was standing in my kitchen, eating a bowl of cereal for dinner. Willow, I said softly, just pick the flowers that make you happy. Happy? She gave a little laugh. You're so simple sometimes. This isn't about being happy. It's about creating an experience. By the 6th month, the total on my secret spreadsheet ticked past $80,000. Each line item was a testament to a life I couldn't imagine living: custom monogrammed cocktail napkins, a string quartet from San Francisco, artisanal cheese platters, a vintage convertible for the getaway car. I had only met Leo a handful of times. He was charming, handsome, and his smile never quite reached his eyes. When he looked at me, I felt like a piece of furniture in the room, functional, necessary for a time, but ultimately uninteresting. I was the sister-in-law with the steady job and the open wallet. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, an email landed in my inbox from the wedding planner. The subject line: guest list update and final seating chart. I opened the attached PDF, a flicker of curiosity wondering where I'd be seated. I scrolled down to the table labeled Bridal Party and Immediate Family. My parents' names were there. Leo's parents were there. His brother, the best man, was there. My name was not. I scrolled through the entire list of 150 guests. It wasn't a mistake. I was not on it. I called my mother, my hand trembling slightly. There was a long pause after I asked. Then a heavy sigh. Autumn, honey. Willow is under so much pressure. And Leo's mother, Fiona, she felt it would be best to keep the head table very cohesive, to avoid any potential tension. Tension, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. What tension? Mom, I'm paying for this. And we're all so grateful, she said, her voice taking on a placating tone. But you know how you get. You're so serious and introspective. Fiona was worried you might bring a certain heaviness to the celebration. You're the strong one, Autumn. You can understand that this one day needs to be light and perfect for your sister. I hung up the phone. A few hours later, a long text from Willow arrived. The gist of it was a masterpiece of self-centered justification. I need this day to be about me and Leo. Your presence, with all its history, just feels complicated. I know you've done so much, and I'll make it up to you someday. Make it up to me. Like I was a business partner in a deal that had gone slightly sour. I sat in my rented apartment, the one I lived in because the condo I'd wanted was now a line item on a wedding spreadsheet. On my coffee table was my electric bill and a book on mindfulness I'd bought for myself. I opened my laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet. The final total, $84,650. And for the first time, the numbness gave way to a feeling so cold and clear it was almost serene. It was the feeling of someone who had painstakingly built a beautiful house for another, only to find the locks had been changed. I wasn't just uninvited. I had been used, and then, when my function was complete, I had been erased. That night, sleep was a distant country I couldn't reach. It felt as if a fever I'd been carrying for years had finally broken. I made coffee at 3 a.m., the rain outside painting slick, shimmering patterns on my window. In the quiet glow of my kitchen, I sat down at my laptop. I opened the folder I had labeled Willow's Wedding. Inside were dozens of subfolders: contracts, invoices, payment confirmations. I clicked open the master agreement from Seacliff Manor. I scrolled past the florid descriptions of ocean views and gourmet menus to the fine print. And there it was on the signature line, Autumn Reed. Not Willow Reed. Not Sarah Reed. Not Fiona Vance. Mine. They had needed a signatory with a good credit score and a proven ability to pay. They knew I was reliable. I found the cancellation clause. Section 8.c. Cancellation by client less than 30 days prior to event date will result in forfeiture of the deposit. All other scheduled payments will be voided. The final payment of $40,000 was due in 3 days. The wedding was in 5. I took a slow, deep breath. The years of quiet accommodation fell away. I opened a new email. To Margaret Dunn, Events Director, Seacliff Manor. Subject, Cancellation. Event hashtag 743B Reed/Vance Wedding. Margaret. As the sole signatory and financial guarantor for the above-referenced event, I am hereby formally canceling the contract, effective immediately, per Section 8.c. Please confirm receipt and void the final outstanding invoice. Thank you. Autumn Reed. I hit send. A single click. It was the quietest, most powerful sound I had ever made. But I was just getting started. I called the 24-hour line for Coastal Creations Catering. The manager, a man named Carlos with whom I had spent an hour debating the merits of seared scallops versus crab cakes, sounded sleepy. Autumn, is everything okay? Carlos, I said, my voice calm and even. I am the client on file for the Reed/Vance wedding. I am officially canceling our catering service. If the bride and groom wish to rebook, they will need to sign a new contract and provide payment themselves. I am no longer financially responsible. There was a pause, then a low whistle. Wow. Okay. I've seen it all in this business. I'll email you the cancellation confirmation in the morning. Next, Blooms of Carmel. The florist. The string quartet. The vintage car rental. The artisanal stationer who had printed 150 invitations with my credit card. I worked with the methodical precision of a data engineer cleaning a corrupted file. Each call, each email was a deletion of a line of code that had been draining my own system's resources for far too long. Some vendors were sympathetic. Others were strictly business. It didn't matter. I was the name on the contract. I held the power. By sunrise, it was done. I updated my spreadsheet. Total spent, $84,650. Initial deposits and non-refundable fees lost, $38,200. The rest, I had managed to cancel before the final payments went through. I looked at the number. $38,200. I thought of it not as a loss, but as the price of my own liberation. It was the most expensive and most valuable lesson I had ever learned. Not just how to say no, but how to reclaim my own signature. 3 days after I systematically dismantled the wedding, the storm broke. It began not with a thunderclap, but with a series of concerned, confusing texts from extended family. My aunt from Portland. Autumn, your mother is worried sick. She says you're having some kind of breakdown. Do you need me to come up to Seattle? A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Hey, heard what happened with the wedding. So sorry you're going through a tough time emotionally. Sending you love. A breakdown? Going through a tough time emotionally? I set my phone down, a cold dread creeping up my spine. They weren't just angry. They were rewriting the narrative. The final confirmation came in an email from the photo booth company, a vendor I had forgotten to contact. Dear Miss Reed, we received a call from the mother of the bride, who informed us of the unfortunate circumstances and your current emotional distress. We are so sorry to hear you are unwell and wish you a speedy recovery. We have canceled the booking as requested. Your current emotional distress. Unwell. I stared at the words, the calculated cruelty of them sinking in. In their story, I wasn't a woman who had been exploited and then discarded. I was the unstable older sister who, in a fit of jealousy or mental collapse, had sabotaged her perfect, fragile sister's happiness. I was the problem. I was the one who needed to be fixed. The old Autumn would have raged, or cried, or retreated into silence, wounded by the injustice. The new Autumn opened her laptop. My strength had never been in emotional confrontation. It was in logic, in facts, and data. I drafted an email. Subject: Clarification regarding cancellation of Reed/Vance wedding contracts. To all involved vendors. This is Autumn Reed. I am writing to formally clarify the recent cancellation of all services related to the Reed/Vance wedding. I was the sole financial guarantor and signatory on all contracts. My decision to terminate these agreements was a deliberate and rational business decision, made after I was formally uninvited from the event and my involvement in the planning was nullified. This decision was not the result of any emotional breakdown or instability, as has been regrettably suggested to some of you by third parties. I was, and remain, of sound mind and fully competent in all my actions. My professional and financial records, as well as our direct communications, will attest to this. Thank you for your professionalism. I trust you will rely on contractual facts rather than familial hearsay moving forward. Respectfully, Autumn Reed. I sent it to every vendor, and I CC'd my old college roommate, Mark, who is now a partner at a law firm in San Francisco. 5 minutes later, Mark called. Autumn. I read the email. Clean. Precise. Do you need me to send a cease and desist? Not yet, I said, my voice clear. I just need the truth on the record. That evening, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. And again. On the 4th try, I answered. Autumn, I am flying to Seattle tomorrow, she said, her voice dripping with a manufactured, theatrical concern. I am so worried about you. I'm fine, Mom, I said flatly. Then why are you making such a mess? Why are you trying to ruin your sister's life? I didn't ruin anything, I replied, my voice as cold and sharp as glass. I simply withdrew my investment from a project I was cut out of. And for the record, telling everyone I'm having a mental breakdown is a new low, even for you. There was a choked silence. I never said that, she finally whispered, her voice stiff with indignation. I just said you were struggling. Fiona was asking questions. I had to tell her something to keep the peace. You chose to let them believe I was unwell to save face, I said. A perfect wedding built on my money and my supposed instability. How very peaceful. You're twisting things, Autumn. You've always been so dramatic. I almost laughed. Me, the quiet one, the easy one, dramatic? No, Mom, I said, a profound sense of finality settling over me. I'm just done being the foundation for a house I'm not allowed to live in. I ended the call. Later that night, sorting through my digital files, I stumbled upon an old email thread with the wedding planner. I'd been copied on it by mistake weeks ago and had archived it without reading. The subject was final touches. I opened it, and there, nestled between discussions of table linens and canapes, was a message from my mother to the planner. It read, Kelly, please coordinate all final budget and creative decisions directly with me and Willow from now on. Let's keep Autumn out of the loop on the details. She's far too pragmatic and tends to question every expense. We don't want her analytical energy killing the joyful, celebratory mood we're trying to create. I read it twice. And then a third time. And all the broken pieces inside me clicked into a single, painful, coherent picture. I was never meant to be part of the joy. I was just the bank. The pragmatic, analytical, joy-killing bank. The final piece of the puzzle came from Mark, my lawyer friend. Autumn, he said over the phone a few days later, his voice grim. I did that informal background check you asked for on Leo Vance. You're not going to like it. I braced myself. He's not a wealth manager at a big firm. He works for a small, struggling brokerage. He has over $60,000 in credit card debt and, according to a public records search, 2 liens against him for unpaid personal loans. One of them is from an online sports betting platform. I closed my eyes. The sophisticated, successful fiancé from Wharton was a mirage, a carefully constructed lie. And my family, in their desperate reach for a certain kind of status, had been all too willing to believe it. To fund it. I finally understood. The wedding wasn't just a celebration of love. It was a performance. A desperate, expensive play to prove they were worthy of a world they weren't part of. And I had been cast in the silent, thankless role of producer. I didn't expect to see him again. I had assumed and hoped that our orbits would never again intersect. But the universe, it seems, has a strange and often ironic sense of timing. I was in Denver for a national conference on healthcare data ethics, an annual event I always looked forward to. The final evening featured a networking reception on the rooftop terrace of the hotel, a chic space with fire pits and sweeping views of the city lights. I was standing near the edge of the terrace, holding a glass of club soda, listening to a fascinating conversation about predictive analytics in patient care. Well, if it isn't the ghost at the feast. The voice was smooth, laced with a familiar, mocking arrogance. I turned. Leo stood a few feet away, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked different than I remembered. His suit was slightly rumpled, his tie loosened, and there was a faint, desperate glossiness in his eyes. "Small world," I said, my voice neutral. He took a step closer, a smirk playing on his lips. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Pulling the plug like that. You think you won." "It wasn't a game, Leo." I made a move to walk away, but he shifted to block my path. "Oh, but it is," he hissed, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that reeked of stale liquor. "It's always a game. And you are just a pawn. A very useful, very rich pawn." His words didn't shock me, but hearing them spoken aloud, so bluntly, was like having a dark suspicion confirmed in bright, ugly light. "You're not the heroine of this story, Autumn," he sneered, leaning in closer. "You're the footnote. The convenient excuse. The walking, talking ATM that let everyone pretend they were something they're not. You think Sarah and David and precious little Willow actually respect you? They pity you. They use you. You're the price they pay to feel good about themselves." My hand, resting in my coat pocket, found my phone. With a practiced, discreet movement, I swiped open the camera and hit the record button, holding the phone steady at my side. "Thanks for clarifying," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Leo laughed, a raw, bitter sound. "Clarifying? Honey, I'm just giving you the truth you were too stupid to see. You paid for a fantasy, and then you got mad when you weren't cast in the lead role. Willow will never, ever forgive you for taking that away from her." "That's fine," I said, my gaze level with his. "Because if her love was contingent on me funding a life she couldn't afford and then disappearing on command, it wasn't love I ever wanted." He stared at me, his smirk finally faltering, replaced by a flicker of raw fury. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you?" "No," I said softly, raising my phone just enough for him to see the red recording light. "But I have this. So the next time your mother-in-law, or my mother, decides to tell the world I'm unstable, I won't have to say a word. I'll just press play." The color drained from his face. For a single, stunning moment, he looked like a man who had just realized the stage beneath his feet was collapsing. He opened his mouth, then closed it, muttering a curse under his breath before turning on his heel and disappearing back into the crowd. I stopped the recording, my hand steady. I hadn't won a game. I had simply collected the final piece of data I needed to close the file for good. The wedding happened. Not at the sun-drenched coastal manor in Carmel, but at a community hall in a suburb of Denver that Leo's family managed to book at a discount. A former colleague of mine, whose cousin was in the wedding party, sent me a text a few days later. "Weirdest wedding I've ever been to. No real flowers, just some silk things." The bride looked sad. Kept looking toward the door like she was expecting someone else to walk in. I read the message in a quiet coffee shop in Seattle, watching the rain fall. I felt no satisfaction, no triumph. Just a quiet, hollow ache for a sisterhood that had been a mirage. The following week, I started therapy. Dr. Evans' office was a calm, quiet space filled with books and afternoon light. In our first session, I talked for 50 straight minutes, the words pouring out of me like a dam breaking. "I spent my entire life believing that my value was in my strength," I told her, my voice thick with unshed tears. But strength was just another word for usefulness. The moment I stopped being useful, I stopped being valuable. "And now?" she asked gently. "And now," I said, taking a deep breath, "I have to learn to be valuable to myself." It was the beginning of a quiet, internal renovation. I established rules for myself, boundaries I had never felt entitled to before. My resources, financial, emotional, and temporal, are mine to allocate. I do not owe anyone an explanation for saying no. I will no longer make myself small to make others feel big. I changed my phone number. I joined a hiking group. I took a pottery class, getting my hands dirty with clay, creating something imperfect and wholly my own. I started to build a life where I was the main character, not the silent benefactor. Then, on a Tuesday morning in late spring, a letter arrived. It was a single, cream-colored envelope, my name written on the front in a familiar, elegant script. Willow's handwriting. I opened it with hands that did not tremble. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Autumn. There are no excuses for what I did. I'm not writing this to ask for your forgiveness, because I haven't earned the right to ask for anything. The life I tried to build was a house of cards. Leo left a month after the wedding. The money was gone, and when there was no one left to ask for more, he was gone too. I lost everything I thought I wanted. But the only thing I truly lost was you. I spent my whole life believing you were a safety net, so strong you would always be there to catch me. I never once stopped to think that a safety net can be shredded by the weight it's forced to carry. I mistook your strength for an obligation. I was wrong. I see that now in the silence. I'm back in Eugene. I'm working at a coffee shop. I'm re-enrolling in school, paying for it myself. I'm starting over. If you would ever be willing, I would like to have a cup of coffee with you. Not to fix things and not to be forgiven. Just to sit in the same room with my sister. I will wait. Even if the answer is silence, I'll understand. Willow. I read the letter 3 times. 3 days later, I drove to Eugene. I chose a small, neutral cafe downtown. She was already there, sitting at a small table by the window. She looked smaller, thinner. The carefully curated fragility was gone, replaced by a genuine weariness that was somehow more real than anything I'd seen in her before. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice quiet. We talked for an hour. She didn't make excuses. She didn't cry. She simply told me her story, the story of a girl who had finally hit the ground, with no one there to catch her, and had been forced, for the very first time, to learn how to stand up on her own. When we left, she didn't ask for a hug. I didn't offer one. We just stood on the sidewalk for a moment. "If you're really learning to stand on your own," I said, my voice softer than I expected, "then I'm willing to learn how to stand beside you again. Not to hold you up. Just to witness it." A flicker of something, not joy, but maybe hope, passed through her eyes. I drove back to Seattle that afternoon, the sky clearing over the Cascades. I didn't know what our future would look like. Forgiveness wasn't a single event, but a slow, uncertain landscape. But for the first time, I wasn't being pulled back into an old story. I was stepping, cautiously, into a new one. One where strength wasn't about how much you could carry for others, but about the courage it takes to finally set it all down and walk your own path. My story may not be your story, but maybe you've stood in a similar place, always seen as the strong one, the capable one, the one who could handle it. Have you ever been the invisible support system for someone else's dream? Have you ever been pushed out of a space you helped to build? If this resonates, I hope you'll share your thoughts below. Not to assign blame, but to let others know they aren't alone in that quiet, lonely place. And if this story moved you, please follow the channel. We'll continue to share stories about the quiet battles, the hard-won boundaries, and the beautiful, messy work of reclaiming yourself.